Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and onto Kepler Prime Station, his polished diplomatic shoes clicking against the metal deck plates. The massive space station hung in the void between star systems, a neutral ground where no single species held power. It was humanity's first invitation to a major galactic summit, and Jake knew the weight of this moment would echo through history. Behind him, Lisa Barnes moved with the quiet confidence of a trained soldier. Her hand rested casually near her sidearm, a habit that had kept her alive through 3 colonial wars. She wore the dress uniform of Earth's Diplomatic Security Service, but her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings like a predator watching for threats. The station's corridors buzzed with alien life. Tall insectoid Zephyrians clicked and chittered as they walked on 6 legs, their compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights. Ghostly voidborn floated past without touching the ground, their translucent forms shimmering like heat mirages. Crystalline shapers grew temporary limbs from their rock-like bodies to manipulate control panels, while aquatic deep-sworn moved through specially designed water-filled tubes that ran along the walls. "First time seeing this many species in one place," Lisa murmured to Jake as they followed the guidance lights toward the diplomatic quarters. "Try not to stare," Jake replied quietly. "We're the new kids here. Every move we make is being judged." They reached the security checkpoint that led to the main diplomatic chambers. A holographic display showed dozens of languages, but the meaning was clear in any tongue. All weapons must be surrendered before entering the sacred halls of diplomacy. Jake watched as delegates from various species placed their ceremonial blades, energy projectors, and defensive devices into containment fields operated by robotic attendants. A Zephyrian officer approached them, its movements precise and mechanical. The translator device around its neck spoke in perfect English. "Greetings, human delegates. I am Sub-Commander Velk. You must place all weapons and defensive equipment in the containment field before proceeding." Jake smiled politely. "I appreciate the explanation, Sub-Commander, but we'll be keeping our weapons." The insectoid's head tilted in a way that somehow conveyed confusion despite its alien features. "I believe there is a translation error. All species surrender weapons before diplomacy. This has been galactic law for 3,000 years. "No. Translation error," Jake said calmly. "Humans conduct diplomacy while armed. It's our way." Several nearby delegates had stopped to listen. A tall voidborn drifted closer, its form crackling with barely contained energy. "This is most irregular," it said, its voice like wind through empty spaces. "Civilized beings do not bring instruments of death to discussions of peace." Lisa stepped forward slightly, her movement subtle but unmistakable to anyone with military training. "With respect, sir, these aren't instruments of death. They're tools that help us sleep peacefully at night." The Voidborn's form flickered with what might have been amusement or annoyance. "I am Speaker Enthara of the Void Collective. Your species is young and perhaps does not understand the sacred nature of diplomatic space. Here we transcend the primitive need for violence." "Ambassador Jake Morrison, representing Earth and its colonies," Jake replied with a slight bow. "And we understand the sacred nature of peace perfectly. That's why we're prepared to defend it." More aliens had gathered now, drawn by the unusual sight of a diplomatic incident before the summit had even begun. A group of crystalline shapers shifted their forms to get better viewing angles, while several deep-sworn pressed against the walls of their water tubes to listen. Sub-Commander Velk clicked its mandibles together, a sound the translator rendered as throat-clearing. "Perhaps there is a misunderstanding about human customs. Surely you do not mean to imply that peace requires weapons? Not requires, Jake said carefully, but peace is more secure when good people are prepared to defend it. We've learned that the hard way in our history. Chancellor Krixtal of the Zephyrian hegemony arrived, his larger size and more elaborate carapace marking his high rank. His compound eyes fixed on the humans with something approaching scientific curiosity. How fascinating! The young species believes that carrying death tools somehow enhances life preservation. Your translator is working fine, Chancellor, Lisa said evenly. We carry these weapons because we value life. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to be ready to stop those who would harm them. But who would bring harm to a diplomatic gathering? Asked a Shaper delegate, its crystalline voice ringing like wind chimes. This is sacred space. Violence is forbidden by the oldest laws of civilization. Jake and Lisa exchanged a glance. In that moment, they both understood something the aliens didn't. Peace wasn't a natural state that maintained itself. Peace was something that had to be built, maintained, and sometimes fought for. In human history, Jake said slowly, we've learned that declaring a place sacred doesn't stop bad people from violating it. Laws only work when someone is willing to enforce them. Speaker Anthara's form pulsed with energy. This is primitive thinking. We have evolved beyond such concerns. The galactic community has not seen violence in diplomatic spaces for over a millennium. That's wonderful, Jake replied, but we'd still like to keep our weapons. The crowd of aliens buzzed with discussion in dozens of languages. Some seemed offended, others curious, and a few appeared genuinely concerned about this breach of protocol. Chancellor Krixtal raised one of his upper arms for silence. This presents a unique situation. Never has a species refused the ancient protocols of peaceful discourse. We're not refusing peaceful discourse, Lisa interjected. We're just doing it our way. The Council must deliberate, the Chancellor announced. Perhaps a compromise can be reached. 2 hours later, the decision came down. Humans would be permitted to carry sidearms into the diplomatic chambers, but the weapons had to be disabled as a gesture of good faith. Jake agreed readily, though. He noticed Lisa's almost imperceptible nod when he mentioned the word disabled rather than surrendered. As they finally entered the great diplomatic hall, Jake marveled at its beauty. The chamber was a sphere of transparent metal hanging in space, with the galaxy's stars providing a backdrop for discussions of peace and cooperation. Delegates from hundreds of species took their positions at floating platforms arranged in complex, geometric patterns. Think they'll ever understand why we do this? Lisa whispered, as they found their assigned platform. Jake watched the alien delegates settle into their places, all of them visibly relaxed now that the dangerous humans had agreed to disable their weapons. He thought about humanity's long history of war and peace, of the thin line between civilization and chaos, and of all the times in human history when good people had needed to be ready to fight for what was right. Maybe, he said quietly. But I hope they never have to learn the hard way. The first session of the Galactic Diplomatic Summit was about to begin, and humanity was about to make its mark on galactic civilization in ways no one could have predicted. The diplomatic chambers hummed with the sound of 100 different species conducting the galaxy's business. Jake Morrison sat at the human platform, watching as holographic displays showed trade routes, resource allocation charts, and territorial boundaries that stretched across countless star systems. It had been 3 days since the weapon controversy, and most of the alien delegates seemed to have forgotten about it. Most, but not all. Chancellor Krickstahl's compound eyes often turned toward the human delegation, studying them like specimens in a laboratory. During breaks in the proceedings, Jake had overheard several Zephyrian delegates making comments about primitive attachment to violence and evolutionary regression. The Shapers were more direct, with one crystal being actually growing temporary sound chambers to mock human death worship to anyone who would listen. Lisa Barnes stood at the edge of their platform, her disabled sidearm hanging from her belt, like a piece of decorative jewelry. The weapon's power cell had been removed and stored in a security vault 3 levels away, making it about as dangerous as a paperweight. But Jake noticed that Lisa's hand still rested near it out of habit, and her eyes never stopped moving as she scanned the enormous chamber. The deep-sworn delegation would like to propose new shipping lanes through the Coral Nebula, announced the session moderator, a floating robot that spoke in all languages simultaneously. This would reduce travel time between the outer rim worlds by 37%. Jake activated his platform's communication system. The human delegation supports this proposal, but we'd like to suggest additional security escorts for the new routes. Pirates have been active in that region. A wave of clicking sounds came from the Zephyrian section. Chancellor Krickstahl rose on his 6 legs and addressed the chamber. The human obsession with security and violence continues to color their judgment. The Coral Nebula has been peaceful for 2 centuries. What pirates could possibly threaten modern shipping? The kind that don't care about your laws, Lisa muttered under her breath, too quietly for the translator to pick up. Speaker Anthara's ghostly form drifted forward. Perhaps the humans are projecting their own aggressive tendencies onto others. In human space, I understand that violence is commonplace. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice diplomatic. We've had our share of conflicts, yes, but that's exactly why we know how important it is to be prepared. Peace isn't something that just happens naturally. On the contrary, said a melodic voice from the Luminol delegation, these energy-based beings existed as pure light and thought, their words transmitted directly into the translation network. Peace is the natural state of all intelligent life. Violence is an aberration, a sickness that some species carry longer than others. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took Jake a moment to process it. Around the chamber, he could see other delegates nodding in agreement. Humanity wasn't just being criticized for carrying weapons. They were being diagnosed as mentally ill. The Terran Coalition has brought nothing but stability to our region, Jake replied firmly. Our armed merchant vessels have reduced piracy by 60% in the systems we patrol. Armed merchant vessels, repeated a Shaper delegate, its crystalline voice ringing with disapproval. The very concept is antithetical to civilized commerce. It works, Lisa said, stepping forward slightly. Our traders sleep better knowing they can defend themselves and their cargo. Chancellor Krickstahl's mandibles clicked in what the translator called amusement. Interesting. Do human traders also sleep with weapons under their pillows? Is there no place in human society where you feel safe enough to be unarmed? Before Jake could answer, the chamber's alert system activated. A soft chime that was somehow audible to all species, followed by Captain Steve Hunter's voice from the human escort ship Dawn's Promise, stationed near the diplomatic facility. Kepler Prime. Control, this is Captain Hunter. We're detecting an unidentified contact approaching your position. Large vessel, unknown configuration, running silent with no response to our hails. The chamber fell silent. Jake watched as alien delegates looked around uncertainly, as if unsure how to process this information. On his personal communicator, He could see Lisa's security team checking in from their positions around the station. Probably just a late arrival, suggested a void-born delegate. Many species have unconventional approach patterns. Negative, came Steve's voice again. This contact is moving too fast for a diplomatic vessel, and it's not using any recognized IFF codes. Kepler Prime, you should go to alert status. Jake looked around the chamber and realized something that chilled him. None of the alien delegates seemed alarmed. They were treating this like a minor scheduling mix-up, not a potential security threat. "Lisa," he said quietly, "how long would it take to get to our weapons?" "Security vault is 3 levels down through 2 checkpoint zones," she replied without moving her lips. 15 minutes if we run, 20 if we follow normal diplomatic protocols. The human delegation requests permission to retrieve our weapons. "From storage," Jake announced to the chamber. The request caused an immediate uproar. Dozens of species began speaking at once, their translators creating a chaos of overlapping protests. "Absolutely not," declared Chancellor Crickstall. "This is exactly the kind of paranoid overreaction we feared from your species." "There is no threat here," added Speaker Anthara. "Diplomatic space is sacred. No being would dare violate it with violence." Jake stood up, his diplomatic training warring with his survival instincts. Around the chamber he could see security. Robots positioning themselves near the entrances, but they were designed for crowd control, not military defense. Their weapons were non-lethal, meant to stun unruly delegates, not repel armed attackers. "Captain Hunter, what's the status on that contact?" Jake asked through his communicator. "Contact has separated into multiple vessels. Count is now 12. Ships, moving in attack formation. Kepler Prime, you need to activate your defenses now." The chamber's main display activated, showing a tactical view of the space around the diplomatic station. 12 red dots were accelerating toward Kepler Prime's position, their weapon systems clearly active and targeting the station's critical systems. "Those aren't diplomats," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the alien chatter. "That's a raiding fleet." For the first time since they'd arrived, Jake saw fear in the alien delegates' eyes. Not concern, not diplomatic worry, but genuine, primal terror. These beings had lived their entire lives in a galaxy where diplomatic spaces were truly sacred, where the very idea of attacking a peace conference was unthinkable. "The station's defenses will handle this," Chancellor Crickstall said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "What defenses?" Jake asked. "This is a diplomatic station. I've seen the specifications. It has basic shields and crowd control systems, nothing designed to fight off military vessels." The first impacts shook the station. Emergency lights began flashing as the raiders' opening salvo struck Kepler Prime's outer hull. Somewhere in the distance, Jake could hear the sound of explosions and the hiss of atmosphere being vented into space. Lisa was already moving toward the exit, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Sir, we need to get our people to defensible positions. All delegates remain calm," announced the station's computer system. "Minor technical difficulties are being addressed. Diplomatic sessions will resume shortly." Jake looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien delegates who had never faced violence in their lives, who had built their entire civilization on the assumption that some places and some people were simply too sacred to attack. They sat frozen, in their platforms, unable to process what was happening. "Lisa," he said quietly, "I think it's time the galaxy learned why humans carry weapons to peace talks." The station shook again, harder this time, and the lights flickered. In the distance, Jake could hear the sound of metal being torn apart, and the electronic screaming of dying computer systems. The Galactic Diplomatic Summit was about to become something it had never been in 3,000 years of history. A battlefield. The third impact sent Chancellor Krixtal sprawling across his platform, his 6 legs scrambling for purchase on the smooth metal surface. Around the diplomatic chamber, delegates from dozens of species cried out in alarm as their floating platforms swayed and sparked from the station's buckling power grid. "All diplomatic personnel, this is Station Commander Yoltek," came a shaky voice over the intercom. "We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain in your assigned areas while we resolve the situation." Jake Morrison was already on his feet, his diplomatic instincts abandoned in favor of survival training. Through the chamber's transparent walls, he could see flashes of weapons fire and the twisted wreckage of outer hull sections spinning away into space. "Lisa, get our security team on the comm," he ordered. Lisa Barnes had her personal communicator out before he finished speaking. "Carson, Rodriguez, Kim, this is Barnes. Report status immediately." "Barnes, this is Carson," came the reply. "We're locked down in the security level. Something's jamming the elevator systems. Station security is in full panic mode. Another impact closer this time." The lights went out for several seconds before emergency power kicked in, casting everything in a hellish red glow. "Captain Hunter, what's your status?" Jake called to his ship. Steve Hunter's voice crackled through heavy static. "Jake, these aren't random pirates. This is a coordinated military assault. 12 ships, heavy weapons, and they know exactly where to hit to disable the station's defenses. Someone's done their homework." On the main display, the tactical situation was becoming clear. The attacking ships had surrounded Kepler Prime and were systematically destroying anything that could fight back. The station's few defensive turrets were already silent, reduced to scrap metal by precise weapons fire. Speaker Anthara's ghostly form flickered with distress. "This cannot be happening. Diplomatic space is sacred across all cultures. No species would dare violate the ancient laws. Somebody forgot to tell them," Lisa said grimly. Through the station's communication system, a new voice cut through the diplomatic chatter. It was harsh, mechanical, and spoke in the trade language that all spacefaring species understood. "Attention, soft skins and crystal bugs. This is Scarmaw of the Marauder Coalition. Your fancy peace talk station is now under our control. You have 10 minutes to transfer all valuable cargo and personal effects to designated collection points, or we start. Venting atmosphere from your meeting rooms." Jake felt his blood run cold. The Marauder Coalition was legendary in the worst possible way. A loose organization of pirates, raiders, and military deserters from a dozen different species. They specialized in hitting soft targets, and diplomatic stations were about as soft as they came. 10 minutes, Jake said to Lisa. "Can we get to our weapons in 10 minutes? "Not through normal channels. Security protocols are designed to prevent exactly what we need to do." Chancellor Krixtal had managed to regain his footing, but his usual confidence was completely gone. "This is impossible. The Marauders only attack merchant convoys and frontier colonies. They would never dare assault a diplomatic gathering." "They would if they thought it was easy prey," Jake replied. "How many times has this station been attacked in its history?" "Never," admitted a Shaper delegate, its crystalline form dim with fear. "Not once in 800 years of operation." "Then they were right," Lisa said. "You are easy prey." The station shuddered again, and this time Jake could hear something new, the sound of cutting tools working through metal bulkheads. The raiders weren't just bombarding the station from outside. They were coming aboard. "Station security to all personnel," came another announcement. Please remain calm while we address unauthorized visitors in sections C through G. Jake almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Even now, the station's automated systems were trying to maintain diplomatic language while pirates carved their way through the hull. "Jake," came Steve's voice again. "I'm reading multiple hull breaches. They're boarding the station in force. My ship's not built for this kind of fight. I can maybe slow them down, but I can't stop a full assault." Around the chamber, alien delegates were beginning to panic. Some Voidborn had simply disappeared, using their energy forms to escape through the station's power conduits. Several Zephyrian junior diplomats were clicking frantically as they tried to access emergency protocols that assumed the threat would come from system failures, not armed attackers. "The human delegation requests immediate access to our secured equipment," Jake announced to the chamber. "Absolutely not," Chancellor Krickstall replied automatically. "Weapons remain forbidden in diplomatic space, regardless of circumstances." "Then we'll improvise," Lisa said, moving toward the chamber's maintenance panel. "Jake, keep them talking. I need 2 minutes." As Lisa disappeared into the service corridors that ran behind the chamber walls, Jake watched the tactical display with growing alarm. The red dots representing enemy ships had moved into docking positions, and new red indicators were appearing throughout the station as the raiders spread out. "The Luminal delegation formally protests this breach of galactic law," declared one of the energy beings. "The Marauders will face severe consequences for violating diplomatic immunity." "The Marauders don't care about your laws," Jake said bluntly. "They care about profit, and a station full of diplomats carrying rare trade goods and valuable technology is exactly the kind of target they dream about." A new sound echoed through the chamber. Weapons fire, close enough to be in the same section of the station. Then screaming, in voices that definitely weren't human. "Station security has been neutralized in sections D and E," came Scarmaw's voice again. "Surrender now, or we start executing 1 delegate every minute until you comply." Jake made a decision that would change human-alien relations forever. He activated his communicator and switched to an open channel that every human on the station could hear. "All Terran Coalition personnel, this is Ambassador Morrison. Diplomatic protocols are suspended. We are under military assault by the Marauder Coalition. All security personnel are authorized to use whatever means necessary to protect civilian lives." The chamber erupted in alien protests, but Jake ignored them. Through his earpiece, he could hear Lisa's voice from somewhere in the maintenance tunnels. "Jake, I found the security vault. The station's emergency systems are completely overwhelmed. I can override the locks without triggering any alarms. Do it." "This is a violation of every law of civilized conduct," Chancellor Krickstall declared. "Weapons are forbidden in diplomatic space." Jake turned to face the alien delegates, his patience finally exhausted. "Your laws are written for civilized opponents. The Marauders aren't civilized. They're predators, and right now everyone in this station is prey." The chamber's main entrance suddenly sparked and began to glow red-hot as someone started cutting through it from the outside. Jake could see shadows moving beyond the metal and the sound of alien voices shouting orders in the harsh trade language. 2 minutes until they're through that door," Jake said to the terrified delegates. "When that happens, your choice is simple. You can die as unarmed civilians, or you can let the humans help you live through this." For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, alien species found themselves facing a choice their peaceful civilization had never prepared them for. Accept human protection, or face the consequences of their own naive faith in laws that predators didn't follow. The cutting sound grew louder and Jake realized that the galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between peace and survival. The chamber's main door finally gave way with a shower of sparks and molten metal. Through the smoking hole stepped creatures that looked like nightmares given form. Korvaxi raiders with their scaled hides and razor-sharp claws, energy weapons, crackling in their hands. Behind them came more pirates, rogue Zephyrians with combat modifications grafted to their carapaces, and hulking Vorthak mercenaries whose thick armor made them nearly invulnerable to civilian-grade weapons. "Everyone on the ground now!" roared the lead raider in heavily accented trade language. "Valuable items in the center, bodies around the edges. Anyone moves, anyone speaks, they die." Jake Morrison watched in horror as hundreds of alien delegates threw themselves to the floor, their elegant diplomatic robes spread around them like colorful carpets. These beings had spent millennia building a civilization based on peaceful discourse, and they had no idea how to react when violence finally found them. Chancellor Krixtall lay on his side, his compound eyes wide with terror as a Korvaxi raider stepped on one of his delicate limbs. Speaker Enthera's energy form flickered weakly, her usual confident glow reduced to frightened sparks. 3 minutes to load everything valuable," announced the raid leader, a massive Korvaxi whose hide was covered in scars and metal implants. "Then we start spacing anyone who looks useless." From her position near the service tunnels, Lisa Barnes watched through a maintenance grate as the pirates spread out through the chamber. Her security team's weapons were still 3 levels away, but she'd found something almost as good in the station's emergency supply lockers: industrial cutting tools, emergency flares, and enough cable to improvise some very effective weapons. Her communicator buzzed with a message from Jake. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast." Lisa keyed her response. 30 seconds. Get ready to move." In the chamber below, one of the younger luminal delegates, a being of pure energy who couldn't be more than a few centuries old, began to pulse with distress. The pirates' weapons were designed to disrupt energy-based life forms, and just being near them was causing the young being physical pain. Amy Clark, a junior diplomat from Earth's Colonial Services, saw the luminal's distress and did something that her training manual specifically said never to do in a hostage situation. She moved. "Hey!" she called out to the nearest raider, a rogue Zephyrian with weapon mounts bolted to his carapace. "That energy being is just a kid. Your weapons are hurting him just by being here." The modified Zephyrian turned to look at her, with mechanical eyes that had replaced his natural compound vision. "Humans, always sticking their noses where they don't belong. I'm asking you to show some mercy," Amy said, slowly getting to her feet despite the weapons pointed at her. "He's not a threat to anyone." Mercy. The raider's laugh was transmitted through a mechanical voice box. "Soft skin, the only mercy I know is making death quick." He raised his weapon toward the young luminal, and Amy did something that would become legend in diplomatic circles. She stepped between them. The energy beam meant for the luminal caught Amy full in the chest, sending her crashing to the floor. But her sacrifice bought Lisa Barnes the distraction she needed. The maintenance grate exploded outward in a shower of sparks as Lisa emerged from the service tunnel, an improvised weapon in each hand. Emergency flares tied to cutting tools made for devastating close-quarters weapons, and she used them with surgical precision. The first raider went down before he knew what hit him. The second managed to turn around just in time to see Lisa's improvised club coming toward his head. Within seconds, 3 pirates were unconscious, and Lisa was already moving toward the weapons they'd dropped. "All human personnel, weapons free!" Jake shouted as he dove toward one of the fallen raiders' guns. Around the chamber, chaos erupted. Ben Carter, a security specialist who'd been posing as a trade attaché, produced a concealed knife from his dress uniform and went after the nearest Vorthak mercenary. Rodriguez and Kim, Lisa's team members who'd finally fought their way up from the lower levels, burst through a side entrance with their weapons raised. But what shocked the alien delegates most wasn't the sudden violence. It was how the humans fought. Every move was calculated to protect the civilians around them. When Lisa fired captured weapons, she made sure her shots wouldn't hit any of the prone delegates. When Ben Carter engaged the Vorthak in hand-to-hand combat, he maneuvered the fight away from a group of terrified Shapers. Jake Morrison found himself back-to-back with Chancellor Crickstall, using a captured energy rifle to drive off raiders while the Zephyrian diplomat cowered behind him. "How did you know?" Crickstall asked, his voice shaking. "How did your people know to be ready for this?" "We didn't," Jake replied, taking down another raider with a precise shot. "We're always ready for this." That's the difference. Across the chamber, Lisa Barnes was coordinating a fighting retreat toward the emergency exits, making sure that every alien delegate who could move was protected by at least one armed human. She'd taken a grazing hit from a Korvaxi claw weapon, but she kept moving, kept fighting, kept protecting people who had never needed protection before. Amy Clark lay where she'd fallen, her breathing shallow but steady. The young luminal she'd protected hovered over her, his energy form pulsing with what could only be described as gratitude and amazement. "Why did she do that?" the luminal asked Speaker Anthara in their shared energy language. "Why did she risk herself for someone she barely knew?" Anthara had no answer. In her species' long history, self-sacrifice for strangers was almost unknown. They protected their own energy clusters, their own family networks, but the idea of dying for someone you just met was incomprehensible. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it changed everything. When the last raider fell, shot down by Rodriguez as he tried to escape through a ventilation shaft, the chamber was filled with smoke, blood, and the acrid smell of discharged energy weapons. But it was also filled with something else. Alien delegates staring at their human protectors with a mixture of awe, confusion, and growing respect. Ben Carter had taken down a Vorthak mercenary twice his size, using nothing but a knife and tactical training. Lisa Barnes stood over the unconscious form of the raid leader, her improvised weapons still smoking from the fight. Jake Morrison helped Chancellor Crickstall to his feet, checking the alien diplomat for injuries despite his own wounds. "The medical teams are on their way," Jake announced to the chamber. "Everyone stay calm and help anyone who's hurt." As he knelt beside Amy Clark to check her wounds, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed. The alien delegates weren't looking at humans like primitive barbarians anymore. They were looking at them like protectors. Chancellor Crickstall approached slowly, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "Ambassador Morrison," he said formally, "the Zephyrian hegemony owes you and your people a debt that cannot easily be repaid." "You don't owe us anything," Jake replied, still focused on making sure Amy was stable. "This is just what humans do. We protect people who can't protect themselves." Around the chamber, other alien delegates were having similar realizations. The galaxy's long peace hadn't been maintained by laws or treaties or diplomatic immunity. It had been maintained because predators like the Marauders had never been desperate or organized enough to challenge it. But now that they had, it was humans, violent, weapon-carrying, paranoid humans who had stood between civilization and chaos. The price of principles, it seemed, was sometimes paid in blood. But as the alien delegates looked around at their human protectors, many of them began to wonder if some principles were worth that price. In the aftermath of the battle, the diplomatic chamber looked like a war zone. Smoke drifted through the air, emergency lights cast everything in harsh red shadows, and the elegant floating platforms lay scattered and broken across the deck. But Jake Morrison wasn't looking at the damage. He was watching the faces of the alien delegates as they tried to process what had just happened. Chancellor Crixatal sat on the floor beside his overturned platform, one of his legs twisted at an odd angle where a raider had stepped on it. His compound eyes kept shifting between Jake and the unconscious pirates scattered around the chamber, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd witnessed. "I don't understand," the Chancellor said quietly. "Your people. You fought for us. You could have escaped, could have saved yourselves, but you stayed to protect beings you barely know." Jake knelt down to examine the Chancellor's injured leg, his diplomatic training combining with basic first aid knowledge. "That's what humans do, Chancellor. We protect people who need protecting." "But why?" This came from Speaker Enthara, whose energy form had stabilized enough for her to communicate again. "Your species gains nothing from our survival. Many of us have been unkind in our assessment of human culture." Lisa Barnes looked up from where she was checking on Amy Clark's wounds. "You want to know why we carry weapons? This is why, not because we love violence, but because we love peace enough to fight for it." Around the chamber, other alien delegates were receiving similar help from the human security team. Rodriguez was helping a group of shapers who had been damaged when their crystalline forms hit the deck too hard. Kim was working with the station's medical systems to treat a deep-sworn delegate whose water-breathing apparatus had been damaged in the fighting. Ben Carter approached the group, his dress uniform torn and blood-stained, but his eyes alert and professional. "Jake, we've secured this section, but there are still raiders elsewhere on the station. Captain Hunter reports that the main Marauder fleet is regrouping for another assault." "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe 30 minutes before they realize their boarding parties failed. After that, they'll probably try to breach the station's core sections." Jake looked around at the hundreds of alien delegates who were depending on him and his small team for protection. The station's own security forces had been overwhelmed in the first few minutes of the attack, and the aliens themselves had no experience with this kind of violence. "Chancellor," Jake said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. How important is your law against weapons in diplomatic spaces?" Crixtal's mandibles clicked nervously. "It is the foundation of galactic civilization. For 3,000 years, it has ensured that conflicts are resolved through words, not violence. And how's that working out for you right now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, other alien delegates had stopped their conversations to listen. "Jake," Lisa said quietly, "we've got incoming communication from the raiders." Skarmaw's voice filled the chamber again, even harsher than before. "Attention station inhabitants. My boarding parties have failed to report in. This tells me that someone is fighting back, and I don't like fighters. You have 15 minutes to surrender all resistance, or I start venting atmosphere from random sections until everyone is dead." Jake stood up and activated the chamber's communication system. "This is Ambassador Jake Morrison of the Terran Coalition. Your boarding parties failed because they ran into people who know how to fight. If you want to negotiate, we can talk. If you want to continue this attack, we'll be ready for you." The response was immediate laughter, harsh and mechanical. Humans. I should have known. You always think you're so tough with your little guns and your big attitudes. Fine, soft skin. Let's see how tough you are when I drop a fusion torpedo on your precious peace talk station. The communication cut off, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. He's bluffing, Jake said to the assembled delegates. Fusion torpedoes would destroy everything valuable on the station, including whatever they came here to steal. But what if he's not? Asked a Shaper delegate, its crystalline voice trembling with fear. Then we fight, Jake replied simply. That's what we do. Speaker Anthara's form pulsed with confusion. But fighting will only bring more violence. Surely there must be a peaceful solution. Jake looked at her for a long moment, then gestured toward Amy Clark, who was slowly regaining consciousness with the help of the young luminal she'd protected. Amy, he called softly, can you tell Speaker Anthara why you stepped in front of that raider's weapon? Amy struggled to sit up, her hand pressed to the burn wound on her chest. Because. She paused, thinking about her answer. Because that luminal was just a kid, and nobody deserves to die just because they're different or defenseless. And what did you think would happen when you stepped in front of that weapon? Jake continued. I thought I'd probably get shot, Amy admitted. But I thought maybe the raider would stop to deal with me, and that might give someone else a chance to help. Jake turned back to the alien delegates. That's what humans mean when we talk about peace. It's not the absence of weapons or the absence of violence. It's the willingness to put yourself between the innocent and those who would harm them. Chancellor Crickstall was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, less certain, more thoughtful. All my life, I have believed that weapons make peace impossible, but I have just watched your people use weapons to protect peace itself. Weapons don't make peace impossible, Lisa said, reloading a captured energy rifle. People who refuse to defend peace make peace impossible. Around the chamber, Jake could see the alien delegates processing this idea. For species that had evolved beyond violence, the concept that force might sometimes be necessary to protect innocence was revolutionary. A young Zephyrian diplomat who had been silent until now suddenly spoke up. My clutch father fought in the border wars before the Great Peace. He always said that the strong protect the weak, not because it benefits them, but because it defines them. Your clutch father was wise, Jake said. The strong who don't protect. The weak aren't strong at all. They're just bullies with better weapons. The station shook again as the Marauder fleet resumed its bombardment. But this time, instead of panic, Jake saw something different in the alien faces around him. He saw understanding. Ambassador Morrison, Chancellor Crickstall said formally, the Zephyrian hegemony formally requests that human security forces be allowed to organize the defense of this station. Similar declarations came from around the chamber. The Shapers, the Deepsworn, even the proud Luminals formally requested human protection. You don't have to ask, Jake replied. We were going to do it anyway. That's what we do. As his team prepared for the next wave of attacks, Jake realized that this moment would be remembered as the turning point in human-alien relations. Not because humans had proven their strength, but because they had proven their character. The galaxy was about to learn that true strength wasn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It was the willingness to protect your friends, even when they couldn't protect themselves. The next assault came exactly when Jake Morrison expected it. Hard, fast, and designed to overwhelm any remaining resistance before the defenders could organize. But Scarmaw had made a critical mistake. He was fighting humans now, and humans had spent thousands of years learning how to turn defensive positions into death traps. Rodriguez, Kim, take positions at the secondary access points, Lisa Barnes ordered through her communicator. Carter, you're with me at the main entrance. We're going to show these pirates what happens when you corner humans protecting civilians. In the diplomatic chamber, Jake had organized the alien delegates into a defensive formation that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The Shapers, with their ability to manipulate their crystalline forms, had created barricades and cover positions. The Deepsworn had flooded several lower corridors to slow down attacking forces. Even the Luminals were contributing, using their energy forms to overload the Raiders' sensor equipment. Ambassador Morrison, Chancellor Crickstall called out, his voice stronger despite his injuries. My people are requesting permission to assist in the defense. Jake looked at the Zephyrian diplomat in surprise. Chancellor, your people don't have military training. This isn't your fight. With respect, Ambassador, you made it our fight when you chose to protect us. If humans can learn to fight for peace, perhaps Zephyrians can learn the same lesson. Around the chamber, Jake could see similar conversations happening. Alien species that had never held weapons were asking his people to teach them how to defend themselves and others. It was the most bizarre diplomatic seminar in galactic history. Incoming! Carter's voice crackled over the communication system. Heavy assault team, multiple species, military-grade equipment. They're not holding back this time. Through the reinforced walls, Jake could hear the distinctive sound of plasma cutters working on the emergency blast doors. The Raiders had learned from their first failure. This time they were coming prepared for serious resistance. Captain Hunter, Jake called to his ship. What's your status? Steve Hunter's voice was strained with combat stress. Jake, I've been dancing with their escort ships for the last 20 minutes. My weapons aren't designed for this kind of fight, but I've managed to damage 2 of their raiders. The problem is their main assault ship. It's moving into bombardment position. Jake felt his stomach clench. If the Marauders started using ship-to-ship weapons against the station, there wouldn't be much left to defend. Steve, can you keep them busy for another few minutes? I can try, but Jake, if they get a clear shot at the station's core, this whole conversation becomes academic. The blast doors finally gave way with a thunderous crash that shook the entire section. Through the smoking breach came a wave of raiders that made the first assault look like a training exercise. Korvaxi shock troops in full battle armor, Vorthak heavy weapons specialists, and leading them all was Skarmaw himself. Nearly 3 meters of scarred hide and cybernetic implants. So these are the famous human warriors, Skarmaw growled, his mechanically enhanced voice echoing through the chamber. I am not impressed. Lisa Barnes stepped out from behind her cover, her captured weapons raised. Then you haven't been paying attention. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lisa and her team fought with a precision and coordination that spoke of years of training and experience, but what made it truly remarkable was how they incorporated the alien delegates into their defensive strategy. When Skarmaw charged toward a group of terrified luminals, it was Chancellor Crickstall who intercepted him, using his Zephyrian speed and agility to distract the massive raider long enough for Carter to get a clear shot. When a Vorthak heavy weapons specialist tried to flank the human positions, a group of Shapers shifted their crystal forms to block his advance, their bodies absorbing energy weapons fire that would have killed organic beings. Jake found himself fighting alongside Speaker Anthara, the void-born diplomat using her energy form to blind and confuse raiders, while Jake took them down with precise weapons fire. It was the strangest partnership in diplomatic history, and it was working. This is impossible, Scarmaw roared as his assault force began to falter. Diplomats don't fight. Civilians don't resist. This violates every rule of raiding. Welcome to human-style diplomacy, Jake replied, putting another raider down with a well-placed shot. We prefer our peace negotiations with a strong defensive position. The turning point came when Amy Clark, still weak from her earlier wound, managed to reach the chamber's emergency controls. With the help of the young luminol she'd protected, she activated the station's internal defense systems. Not the military weapons that didn't exist, but the emergency containment fields designed to prevent atmospheric breaches. Suddenly, half the raiding force found themselves trapped in energy barriers that were designed to hold back the vacuum of space. The other half found themselves cut off from their escape routes and surrounded by an increasingly organized defense. "Fall back!" Scarmaw ordered his remaining forces. "Regroup at the primary access point." But as the raiders retreated, they found their escape route blocked by Captain Hunter's ship, which had broken away from the space battle and moved into a position where its weapons could cover the station's docking bays. "This is Captain Steve Hunter to all Marauder forces," came the announcement over the station's communication system. "Your boarding parties are trapped, your escape routes are blocked, and you're facing organized resistance from people who actually know how to fight. I suggest you consider surrendering." Scarmaw's response was a roar of mechanical rage. "No surrender! We finish this now!" He activated a device on his armor that Jake recognized with horror. A fusion charge, powerful enough to destroy several sections of the station and everyone in them. "Suicide bomb!" Lisa called out. "Everyone down!" But before Scarmaw could trigger the device, something unexpected happened. The young luminol that Amy had protected suddenly flared with brilliant energy, surrounding the Korvaxi raider in a containment field of pure light. "I learned this from watching the humans," the luminol said, his voice strained with effort. "Sometimes you must risk yourself to protect others." The containment field held just long enough for Carter to reach Scarmaw and disable the fusion. Charge. When the energy finally dissipated, the young luminol collapsed, his energy form flickering weakly. "Medical teams to the diplomatic chamber immediately," Jake called out. "We have injured personnel and prisoners to secure." As the immediate crisis passed, Jake looked around at the aftermath of the battle. Human and alien defenders stood together among the wreckage, many of them wounded, all of them forever changed by what they'd experienced. Chancellor Krikstal approached, leaning heavily on an improvised crutch made from a piece of his broken platform. "Ambassador Morrison, I believe. My species owes yours an apology. We thought your weapons made you dangerous. We were wrong." "How's that?" Jake asked, helping to stabilize the injured Chancellor. "Your weapons don't make you dangerous," Krikstal replied. "Your willingness to use them for others makes you invaluable." Around the chamber, Jake could see similar realizations taking hold. The galaxy's peaceful species were beginning to understand that their long peace had been possible not because violence didn't exist, but because they'd never encountered anyone willing to bring it into their sacred spaces. Now that they had, it was humans, violent, armed, supposedly primitive humans, who had stood between civilization and chaos. And for the first time in galactic history, the other species were grateful for it. 3 hours after the last raider had been secured in the station's makeshift detention cells, the diplomatic chamber buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with weapons fire. Medical teams from a dozen species worked together to treat the wounded, while engineers assessed the damage to the station's systems. But the real transformation was happening in the minds of the delegates themselves. Jake Morrison sat beside Amy Clark's medical bed, watching as the young luminol she'd Protected hovered nearby, his energy form still weak but stable. The alien's sacrifice to contain Skarmaw's fusion charge had surprised everyone, including the other luminals. I never thought I would see a luminal risk dissolution for strangers, Speaker Anthara admitted, her own energy form flickering, with what Jake had learned to recognize as emotional distress. We are not known for physical courage. Courage isn't physical, Amy said softly, her voice still weak from her injuries. It's doing what's right even when you're scared. That young one has plenty of courage. Chancellor Krixtal approached their group, moving carefully on his injured leg. The Zephyrian diplomat had spent the last hour in intense communication with his homeworld, and his compound eyes reflected a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before the attack. Ambassador Morrison, he said formally, I have been instructed by the Hegemony Council to extend an unprecedented offer. The Zephyrian government would like to request human military advisors to train our defensive forces. Jake blinked in surprise. Chancellor, 3 days ago your people were calling us primitive warmongers. Now you want us to train your military? 3 days ago I believed that civilization had evolved beyond the need for warriors, Krixtal replied. Today I learned that civilization requires warriors to survive. My people have forgotten how to fight for what we believe in. Perhaps it is time we remembered. Similar conversations were happening throughout the chamber. The Shaper delegation had already begun discussing defensive modifications to their crystal cities. The Deepsworn were planning to establish security forces for their underwater colonies. Even the peaceful luminals were considering how to protect their energy collectives from those who would exploit their pacifist nature. Lisa Barnes approached the group, her arm in a medical support brace, but her eyes alert and professional. Jake, we're getting reports from all over the galaxy. Word about the attack is spreading fast, and it's causing some major policy changes. What kind of changes? The Altarian Trade Federation just announced that all their merchant vessels will carry escort ships. The Centauri Republic is reinstating their old military academies. 3 different species have formally requested human protection for their diplomatic facilities. Jake felt a mixture of pride and concern. Lisa, we never wanted to be the galaxy's police force. No, said a new voice. But perhaps the galaxy needs police after all. They turned to see a figure none of them had expected. Counselor Nex Ara of the Void Collective, Speaker Anthara's superior and one of the most powerful beings in the galactic government. Her energy form was larger and more complex than Anthara's, crackling with power that spoke of centuries of experience. Counselor, Jake said, standing respectfully. I didn't know you were aboard the station. I arrived during the battle, Nexara replied. I came to investigate reports of human aggression at the diplomatic summit. Instead, I found humans dying to protect my people from those who would harm them. She gestured toward the young luminal who had saved them all from Skarmaw's fusion charge. That youngling learned something in a few hours that my species has spent millennia trying to forget. Sometimes the only way to preserve life is to risk it. Captain Steve Hunter's voice crackled through the communication system. Jake, you need to hear this. We just intercepted a transmission from the remaining Marauder ships. They're retreating, but they're broadcasting a warning to other pirate fleets. What kind of warning? They're telling everyone to avoid stations and colonies with human protection. According to the transmission, the soft skins fight like demons and teach their pets to do the same. Jake winced at the crude language, but Chancellor Krixtal actually clicked his mandibles in what the translator rendered as laughter. Pets, the Zephyrian repeated. How little they understand. We are not your pets, Ambassador Morrison. We are your students. And today you taught us the most valuable lesson in galactic history. What lesson is that? Jake asked. That peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence, came the answer from Speaker Anthara. Peace is the presence of those willing to use that capacity in defense of others. Around the chamber, Jake could see the fundamental shift that was taking place. Delegates who had arrived as representatives of peaceful, disarmed civilizations were leaving as advocates for a new kind of diplomacy, one that recognized that talking peace was only possible when good people were prepared to fight for it. Amy Clark struggled to sit up in her medical bed, her eyes focused on the young. Luminal, what's your name? She asked. I realized I never learned it. The energy being pulsed with what his species used for embarrassment. I am called Bright Hope in Darkness. It is a youngling name. I had not yet earned an adult designation. Well, Bright Hope, Amy said with a smile. I think you've earned it now. Anyone willing to risk their life for strangers has earned whatever name they want. Counselor Nex Ara's form flickered with approval. Indeed, the Void Collective will formally recognize Bright Hope in Darkness as an adult member of our society. His actions today exemplify the courage we thought we had evolved beyond. Jake looked around the damaged chamber, at the mix of human and alien beings working together to clean up the aftermath of battle, and realized that something profound had changed in galactic civilization. Chancellor, he said to Crixtel, when we restart the diplomatic sessions, I think we're going to need some new protocols. Agreed, the Zephyrian replied. Perhaps we should begin with a simple acknowledgement that the right to defend oneself and others is not a sign of barbarism, but a cornerstone of civilization. Speaker Anthara's energy form pulsed with agreement. The Void Collective will support such a protocol. We have learned today that our peaceful existence was possible only because no one had been desperate or organized enough to threaten it. And, now that someone has, Counselor Nexara added, we know that humanity stands ready to defend not just their own people, but anyone who cannot defend themselves. As the station's emergency systems continued their repairs and the diplomatic staff began planning for the resumption of talks, Jake Morrison realized that humanity had just achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They hadn't conquered anyone. They hadn't imposed their will through force. They had simply stood between innocent people and those who would harm them. And in doing so, they had earned something far more valuable than fear or submission. They had earned respect. And for the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity wasn't being asked to change to fit in with everyone else. Instead, everyone else was asking to learn from humanity. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months later, Ambassador Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the galaxy's newest diplomatic facility, watching ships arrive from across known space. The station was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Shaper, crystal technology integrated with Zephyrian construction techniques, powered by luminal energy cores and protected by defensive systems that represented the best thinking of a dozen species. But what impressed Jake most wasn't the technology. It was the ships themselves. Every delegation arrived with escort vessels. The Zephyrian diplomatic cruiser was accompanied by sleek fighters crewed by their newly trained peace guardians. The Shaper transport ship bristled with defensive crystal formations that could project protective barriers around friendly vessels. Even the luminal delegation traveled within a constellation of energy beings whose forms had been trained to disrupt hostile sensors and weapons. It's remarkable, isn't it? Said a familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see Chancellor Crixtal approaching, moving easily on legs that had been expertly repaired by human and Zephyrian medical teams working together. The alien diplomat wore a new addition to his formal robes, a ceremonial weapon that would have been unthinkable in galactic diplomacy just months before. "What's remarkable is how quickly everyone adapted," Jake replied. 6 months ago, the idea of armed diplomats was scandalous. Now it's becoming standard practice. Not just standard practice, Krixtal corrected. Expected practice. The Galactic Council's new protocols specifically encourage all diplomatic missions to include adequate security forces. Through the observation windows, they watched as Captain Steve Hunter's ship, the Dawn's Promise, took its position in the station's defensive grid. The human vessel was no longer alone. It was part of a multinational fleet that included ships from 17 different species, all trained in coordinated defense tactics. "Jake," came Lisa Barnes's voice through his communicator, "the security briefing is starting in 10 minutes. All delegation heads are required to attend." Jake smiled at the irony. Security briefings at diplomatic summits. Another innovation. That would have been unthinkable before the Kepler Prime incident. "On our way," he replied. The security briefing was held in a chamber that perfectly embodied the new galactic approach to diplomacy. The room was designed for open discussion and peaceful negotiation, but it also featured clearly marked defensive positions, emergency weapon lockers accessible to certified security personnel, and blast-resistant barriers that could be activated in seconds. Jake took his seat among delegates who represented a transformed galaxy. Speaker Enthara sat with 2 other luminals whose energy forms were trained in defensive techniques. A group of young Zephyrians wore the insignia of their new Peace Guardian Corps. Even the traditionally pacifist Deep Sworn had brought aquatic Marines whose water-filled armor allowed them to fight on dry land. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various configurations," announced Admiral Chen Wei, the human officer who had been selected to head the new Galactic Security Coordination Office. "Welcome to our first joint security assessment." The briefing that followed would have been impossible before Kepler Prime. Representatives from dozens of species shared intelligence about potential threats, coordinated patrol schedules for trade routes, and discussed joint training exercises for their security forces. "The Marauder Coalition has been significantly degraded as a threat," Admiral Chen reported. "Their unsuccessful attack on Kepler Prime caused a major split in their organization. Many of their member groups have abandoned piracy in favor of legitimate trade, while others have been captured or eliminated by joint security operations." Jake listened with satisfaction as species after species reported improvements in the safety of their territories. The Altarian Trade Federation's new escort policy had reduced shipping losses by 70%. The Centauri Republics re-established. Military academies were graduating their first classes of officers trained in both combat and humanitarian operations. But the most remarkable change was cultural, not tactical. "I would like to share an observation," said Bright Hope in Darkness, the young luminal who had helped save Kepler Prime. He had indeed earned his adult name and was now serving as a diplomatic attaché with specialized training in emergency response. "During my recent visit to the Shaper homeworld, I witnessed something unprecedented. A group of crystal children were playing a game they called Protectors and Pirates. The object of the game was for the Protector team to defend the civilian team from the pirate team. What was remarkable was that all the children wanted to be protectors." Around the briefing room, Jake could see other delegates nodding in recognition. Similar reports had been coming in from across the galaxy. Children of traditionally peaceful, Species were growing up with new role models, new stories, and new ideas about what it meant to be brave. Amy Clark, now fully recovered and serving as Earth's liaison to the Galactic Youth Education Initiative, added her own observation. We're seeing the same thing in human space, but in reverse. Our children are learning that being brave doesn't just mean being willing to fight. It means being willing to protect those who can't protect themselves. After the briefing, Jake found himself in the station's central plaza, a vast open space, where delegates from dozens of species mingled freely. The sight that met his eyes would have been impossible under the old system. Zephyrian Peace Guardians were demonstrating close-quarters combat techniques to interested Shaper observers. A group of luminal security specialists were sharing energy disruption tactics with human marines. Deep-sworn aquatic forces were practicing coordinated maneuvers with atmospheric species in specially designed training pools. "It's not what we expected, is it?" said Counselor Nexera, materializing beside him in her characteristic void-born manner. "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "When humans first joined the galactic community, many of us feared that your violent nature would corrupt our peaceful civilization. Instead, your willingness to fight for others has inspired us to become better protectors of peace ourselves." Jake watched as a young Zephyrian cadet helped an elderly Shaper delegate with a mobility assistance device and realized that the counselor was right. Humanity hadn't made the galaxy more violent. They had made it more protective. "Counselor Can, I ask you something? Do you ever regret the way things have changed?" Nexara's energy form pulsed with what he had learned to recognize as contemplation. "Ambassador Morrison, 6 months ago my people believed that we had transcended the need for physical courage. Today, I watched young Luminols volunteer for hazardous rescue operations because they had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve life is to risk it." She gestured toward the mixed groups of beings training together throughout the plaza. "We have not become more violent, Ambassador. We have become more complete. For too long, we believed that civilization meant the absence of the capacity for force. Now we understand that civilization means the responsible use of that capacity." As the day's sessions concluded, Jake made his way to the communications center to file his report with Earth. The message he sent would become part of the historical record of humanity's integration into galactic society. "The Galactic Diplomatic Summit has concluded its first session under the new security protocols," he wrote. "All participating species have formally adopted the principle that the right to defend oneself and others is a fundamental aspect of civilized behavior. The galaxy has not become more militaristic. It has become more responsible." He paused, thinking about how to summarize the transformation he had witnessed. Humanity came to the galaxy carrying weapons, and the other species feared we would teach them violence. Instead, we taught them that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the willingness to protect. They are no longer asking us to disarm before diplomacy. They are asking us to teach them how to stand guard over the peace we all cherish. Jake looked out at the stars, where ships from dozens of worlds moved in coordinated patterns, their crews trained in both the arts of war and the principles of peace. Humanity had found its place in the galactic community not by abandoning what made them human, but by showing others the nobility that could exist in the willingness to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The galaxy had stopped, asking humans to disarm before diplomacy, because they had finally understood what humans had always known. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be prepared to defend it. And in learning that lesson, the galaxy had become not more dangerous, but more safe, protected by those who understood that true civilization meant being willing to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. The age of helpless peace was over. The age of protected peace had begun.